We'll clap. Come on, guys.
It's morning time.
So welcome, everybody. Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Everybody good and awake, ready, pumped up for the conference? Good. Well, welcome to our session. This session is going to be ingredients to a successful desktop virtualization bake-off. My name is Jarian Gibson. I'm a virtualization practice manager for Choice Solutions. I am based out of the Kansas City area. You can follow me on Twitter at Jarian Gibson, and also check out my blog, jariangibson.com.
My name is Shane Kleinert. I'm a solutions architect for an IT consulting company, JDL Technologies, down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And just before we get started, I got to bust a quick cartwheel real quick, because at the speaker dinner last night, there was a $100 wager for the first person that did a cartwheel. So I need everyone to watch real quick and make sure it's on camera. Hopefully nothing flies anywhere. Just I did my stretches, so it should be good.
All right, yeah.
It's been 10 years, so please, thank you. Just edit that falling part out. So, all right, cool.
So also we want to talk about the IRC channel as well for Citrix. We're very active in that channel. It's a channel where you can get into out there on IRC to talk with other admins, other consultants out there. So come check it out, join.citrixirc.com. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, let's talk about some housekeeping items real quick. Feel free to tweet about our session. Use the hashtag BriForum, hashtag TechBakeOff. Also, there are going to be some times where we're going to ask the questions of you guys, so please give us your feedback. And then at the end of the session, please fill out your feedback form so we know how we did. And then towards the end of the session, we'll have a time for Q&A, so save your questions for the end.
All right, so how did we come up with this session? There's really two main reasons of why we came up with this session. The first reason was based upon our field experiences. Most recently, I was working on a project down in South Florida with a large school district, and we were working on a Zen Desktop initiative. And everything was going really well. We were matched the use cases to the business needs. Everything was going great. We've been working with this account for 15 years, not on the Zen Desktop project, but over the years. We're kind of seen as a trusted advisor in that account. And the customer came to us, like I said, everything was going good, and she goes, you know what, everything's going great, I really like Zen Desktop, but in order to move forward, I really need to do my due diligence since we're a large VMware shop and look at VMware View. So I was like, all right, that's great, no problem. So being a trusted advisor in the account, she invited me into the meeting. And in the meeting, I was, to my surprise, right, the VMware engineer was really just throwing around that vendor FUD, really bashing Citrix in a roundabout way, right? He was talking about how PC over IP was better than HDX. He was talking about how Citrix has multiple management consoles, forklift upgrade, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, I just kind of put a stop to it. I was like, listen, we just need to conduct a bake-off. We need to put both solutions side by side. Everyone thought it was a great idea, so I was like, great, I'll do the Citrix side, the VMware guy will do the VMware side. And then the customer said, you know what, Shane, I want you to do the bake-off. You know the environment the best. So I was like, oh. So here he has a large Citrix partner, and now we got to do a VMware View bake-off. How could it be fair, right? So what I knew at that point that we needed to develop a vendor-agnostic framework where we can allow the customer to test both solutions side by side and allow the customer to come up with an educated decision. So at that point after the meeting, I was all excited. I ran out of the meeting like a little kid. I called Jarian up, and I was like, hey, man, what do you think about this idea? He really liked it, and that's kind of how it started. The second reason was really around acquisitions, right? If you think about the marketplace, the acquisitions and the rapid change of products are crazy. Since the day we decided to submit the session to today, there's been about 4 acquisitions in the market between Dell and Quest and Citrix and Virtual Computer and VMware and Nova. It's really hard to keep up with all the change in product sets, right? Same thing with like organizations as consultants and admins. You're wearing multiple hats, so you need to be able to conduct this framework vendor agnostically, right? And that's kind of the main reason why we came up with these sessions. This session. So
let's talk about the overview of the session. We're going to discuss the framework of the bake-off. So the first part is going to be the pre-bake-off, determining your use cases, picking the solutions to bake off. The second part of it is going to be the bake-off test cases and discussion points. Now, in this section, it's going to be examples because your discussion points and test cases are going to depend on what's in your environment. What are you trying to solve, et cetera. So these are kind of just things to give you examples of that. Then we're going to talk about the post-bake-off, wrapping everything up and choosing a solution, and where do you go from there. And then in the very end, we'll do the wrap-up. We'll have some Q&A and also just some other questions on that. So before we get started, we're going to ask the audience a couple questions here.
Yeah, so the first question is, how many of you guys have actually conducted bake-offs before? Okay, wow.
Good amount of you guys.
That's great. And of you guys that conducted the bake-offs, did you have any kind of type of framework or process that you followed?
Only a few?
Right, cool.
Okay.
Mark, nice. All right, cool. So we hope that the feedback that the session content that we provide you with today will be valuable for you guys. And how many of you guys are just kind of here getting into desktop virtualization first time at BriForum? Great. Well, welcome. It's a great conference, and you guys are going to learn a lot. So, and how many of you guys are here just to kind of bust our balls because it's our first time presenting at BriForum? Oh, man.
Excellent, excellent.
Great. Just don't throw any sharp objects, please.
So before we get started, let's talk about some of the kind of first rules of desktop virtualization. Just because you think you have a potential use case does not mean desktop virtualization will be a fit for you. That's what the bake-off is. Maybe it is a fit, maybe it's not, maybe you'll find the right solution. Also, you got to realize that desktop solutions aren't your desktop management product. It's going to work along with your desktop management strategy. And then finally, make sure that you question everything, know everything, understand everything, because if you try to guess at these things, if you try to guess what your users are doing, try to guess at specing the hardware, you're going to fail. So just make sure you guys understand those things when you're looking at your bake-offs. So now we're going to get into the pre-bake-off session.
So before you can dive into a bake-off and really any of these desktop virtualization projects, you really need to define your use cases and your business needs. You need to understand that, because if you don't, your project's going to fail. Period. I don't know how many bake-offs you've done, Jarian, but I know that these type of projects will fail if you don't define these use cases. So,
exactly.
And just some example use cases and business drivers real quick. I'm sure you guys know some of these, so we're just going to go through them pretty quick here. But desktop refreshes, right? I mean, you guys have been doing desktop refreshes for years. You know that you understand you refresh the desktop lifecycle, right? So the CIOs are asking themselves, are we going to continue to do the desktop lifecycle the same way we've been doing it, procuring the desktop, imaging, managing, maintaining, et cetera? Or we're going to start looking at this new paradigm of doing things, kind of the loosely coupled desktop, right? And also acquisitions, quick onboarding. Instead of taking 3 to 6 months to do, or whatever, do an acquisition, you're looking at really quick onboarding when you start looking at technologies like desktop virtualization. And Windows 7, Windows 8 migrations. The same thing we were talking about a couple years ago when we were going XP to Windows 7, now we're going to Windows 7 to Windows 8. We could really speed things up when you're doing desktop virtualization. And flexible workforce, allowing people to work from home remotely, not being tied to that rigid 9 to 5 schedule, really increases productivity. Think of like natural disasters. We were watching, was it Contagion
this weekend.
Yeah, and if there's a flu epidemic or something like that, you can still work. You can still have productivity. Kind of crazy, but and business continuity. The traditional environments. A lot of the big enterprises, right? They have desktop, or they have disaster recovery centers where they replicate their existing desktop environment over into the data center. They have to manage and maintain those desktops, and they have to keep the images so you don't have stale images back and forth, And bring your own device, right? Is from a bring your own device perspective, these students are coming into the environments, and coworkers are coming into the environments with better machines than what the enterprise provides. So you need to be able to provide, if you're looking at BYO device or bring your own device, you need to be able to provide a infrastructure that will enable that, to allow you to deliver those business critical applications to those endpoint devices. Give an example, the education environment, one of the education environments I work with, the students don't have good computers, right? So the teachers actually bought iPads for the entire classroom. That's an example. So what happened, now the classroom, the admins had to maintain those iPads because they need to teach, right? So that's something you want to maintain. You want to jump on the consumerization?
Yeah, so then you look at the consumerization. The users are actually driving what the IT needs. They're bringing their own devices in. They're wanting to use their hardware. Think about the next generation coming up today. We grew up in a mouse and keyboard world. Well, the next generation coming up, they're a touchscreen world. So they want to use touchscreens. You give them a keyboard and mouse, they're like, what is this? I don't know what to do. So just think about those things. They want to drive by bringing their own products in what IT is going to do. So then let's talk about use cases and breakdowns. How to identify them. Ask yourself a couple questions. What kind of problems are you trying to solve in your business? Whether it's remote access, compliance, maybe it's management, maybe you want to get a better handle on how you're doing your desktop life cycles. So kind of ask yourself those questions. Also, try to figure out what kind of challenges you're having today. What are the challenges in your organization? What are things you're trying to do? Is it long provisioning process for new hires? If a machine crashes for a user today, how long does that take to get that machine back up? Since all their data, everything's on that machine, what is the actual downtime and loss in productivity of that user? So kind of think about those things as you're looking at these solutions.
So why determine these use cases prior to conducting a bake-off? It might seem like common sense, but you'll be surprised at how many environments that we walk into where these use cases aren't predetermined. So what do they do instead? Well, they end up going out and conducting these POCs and pilots using the generic use cases that the vendor provides. And what that means is that they don't actually conduct use cases that are in line with what their business needs are. And the other thing is, when you determine use case, the reason why you want to determine a use case ahead of time, and so what you can do is you can weed out these technologies. For instance, if you have a technology, or if you're in an industry that has really heavy regulatory and compliance requirements, and you have a solution where you need to have configuration logging, you need to have auditing in the solution, and you don't go down that path to weed it out, you're going to go 2-3 weeks, a month down the road of picking these solutions, then you're going to hit that roadblock, and you'll be like, oh crap, now I got to start over. So you want to weed these things out ahead of time.
So also, when you're thinking about these solutions, think about user needs versus IT needs. There have to be that balance, right? Users want to be free like hippies. They want to do what they want. They're carefree, et cetera, et cetera. But then you get the IT who wants everything locked down like Fort Knox. They want everything secure, everything in their data center. They want to mitigate risk. So, think about those things. You ever hear the saying, a happy wife is a happy life? Well, a happy end user keeps your project from being a loser, right? Because it's all about the end users. If the project fails, if they don't like it, the project's going to fail. And also, kind of here, the slide here, we're talking about the balance as well. You kind of have your desktop users on one side and your IT manager on another. And think about their needs. Think about what they need to be productive and successful at their jobs. And also think about you as IT, what you need. You want a product to where they get a great user experience, but on the other hand, you want a product that you can manage great as well. You don't want to trade off for one or the other. And then as we're talking about this, we had a little joke here on our go-to-meeting as we were doing our session planning. Here's an example of unhappy end user.
So that's me. I was unhappy with Jarian's go-to-meeting session that he created. He kept muting me, so I decided to pose for this picture here. And I got a little too carried away in the action shot. I actually smashed my MacBook, and I got a new MacBook Retina display, so it actually worked out. Just kidding, that didn't really happen, but maybe I should have done it. So we're going to be talking about kind of cutting through the vendor FUD here. So before we jump into it, we just kind of want to talk to you about what is the definition of FUD. There's a lot of different definitions out there of FUD. The first one is fouled up disinformation, right? The second one is fear, uncertainty, doubt, filthy, unreliable data, and freaking useless debate.
And frequently useless debate is like that debate we hear all the time. Vendors going back and forth, that pissing contest, that jockeying for position. My protocol's better than yours, my stack is better than yours. That's what FUD is. And really what you want to find out is every environment's different, right? So don't listen to that FUD out there. Bring the solution in your environment, test with your users, your data, and check it out and see for yourself. So the first thing we're going to talk about is slicing through the vendor FUD. And the first thing to do when you want to slice through the vendor FUD is educate yourselves. Go out there and do research, right? Being here at BriForum is a good first step, especially for those of you that are first-time BriForum attendees. Then think about, talk to the software vendors out here. There's all kinds of software vendors out here on the expo floor that have different solutions. So talk to them, see how those can fit your needs. Also think about social media. Think about Twitter. Think about those community forums out there. A lot of times you can get good information just by watching some people's Twitter feeds. Sometimes they go off on rants. Sometimes they have very good information, right? Everyone's seen it.
I met Jarian on Twitter. Yeah,
and that's how we met on Twitter. He basically stalked me until I returned his information. That's how we got hooked up, and then I got in the IRC channel, and now we're here today. So, and also understand the environment, how it's going to affect your environment, right? Because what you want to know is when you bring these in, how is it going to change how you do things in your environment today? What's the future going to look like? Also know what the value these things provide as well. And then on the other hand, you also want to understand the concepts, right? You want to kind of know a high level of how these things work because you don't want a vendor to come in and say, oh, yeah, we can do this all the world, but you actually don't know what they're talking about. So I want to make sure you educate and understand these concepts.
So customer references, you want to make sure you get real-world customer examples and examples that are relevant to your business, right? You want to get real-world examples that are relevant to your business, not an industry that you're not in. If you're in healthcare, don't get a reference from education. Obviously, that doesn't make sense, right? You want to keep in mind that these customer references are just that. It's a reference. You want to just use it as a reference and conduct your own bake-offs internally. That's what you need to do. And you want to have a conversation with the vendor on the phone, or without the vendor on the phone. A lot of times these vendors like to have customer case studies or use case studies with the vendor on the phone. That's not you're not going to get honest, valid feedback. You want to try to have that conversation with the customer and hear about their real-world experiences.
And also, let's talk about vendor white papers, right? Because all those vendors put those out there. But what you want to do is stay away from vendor white papers by actually another vendor. You actually want to do the research yourself. Also, stick to community agnostic ones like Project VRC. They'll go through and break down the different desktop virtualization products and kind of compare the features and functions. They did a really good job of doing that. Also, remember, as you're reading these white papers, use them as a guide. It's not like the end-all, be-all. It's something to help you get along the process and get more information. But ultimately, you have to decide on what you're going to do. And then again, remember, every environment is different. Perform your own tests, test with your environments, test with your use cases, because it's all about your end users.
That's you guys.
And also, a couple of questions to ask. How will this fit my business model? So when you're talking to that vendor, say, how will your solution fit into my business model? Also, you want to look at, what are some examples of desktop virtualization in my industry that are being successful out there? You don't want to talk about manufacturing if you're in healthcare. You don't want to talk about financial if you're like a software company. So think about those things. Also, you want to find out what are common examples of applications that don't fit the model, because you want to go ahead and discard those automatically and find other solutions for them. You don't want to go down a path trying to make something work when it's already proven that that won't work in your environment. And then also, find out about the common mistakes, right? You don't want to go and reinvent the wheel. You want to find out what the common mistakes everyone makes, whether it's undersizing hardware, not understanding the user workflows. You want to find this out. That way, you can not make those mistakes and start off on a better route.
So in order to slice through the vendor FUD, you need to conduct your own bake-offs internally. You need to conduct the bake-off with your users, your data, and your applications. Don't go and test on a side little demo environment with none of your real users and none of your real data. It's not going to be a successful bake-off. And you always want to test 2 to 3 solutions. Don't just test and bake off. Obviously, you need to have 2 at least, but try to test 2 or 3. Look at these different solutions. And think about the solutions long term. Think about the roadmap of the solution. Is there vendor lock-in? Do you want to work with a solution that only allows you to work with one hypervisor and they have no vision of working with other hypervisors? You don't want to be stuck in a scenario where you're locked into one particular vendor.
Also, understand your applications out there. When you're doing these bake-offs, make sure you pick the applications you're going to use in the bake-off. Get a list of them. Also, figure out the application dependencies, whether it's hardware or software. Also, know how they'll talk to each other. Say you have one application that needs some kind of plugin, make sure you understand how those fit into your environment. And then also look at the different use cases out there. You have web applications, you have application virtualization in your environment possibly. You have SBC or RDOS, you might have local installed apps. Understand your applications and that workflow about how they're used.
So another thing is you want to understand your hardware. You want to understand what type of peripheral devices that you have in your environment. You want to ask the software vendor if the peripheral devices are supported with their solution. Don't go down a road where you're conducting the bake-off and then you realize you have a peripheral device that's for business critical applications and guess what? It doesn't work. You want to test this stuff out, right? You want to know what operating systems are in your environment and you want to find out if those operating systems are supported. If you only have Windows-based, if you have Windows and Mac OSs and you only test with Windows for your bake-off and now guess what? Your CIO is the one with that Windows or that Mac OS, you're going to have problems if your solution doesn't work on that. So you want to test these different OSs.
And then when you're looking at picking your bake-off candidates, also think about if you already a partner with one software vendor, they have a solution, it's important to look at other solutions. You don't know what you don't know. One solution might be a better fit than one you have in-house today with that vendor. So ask yourself, if another vendor will fit your needs better. There's some features and functions you might not know about, and they're a solution to where you're looking, you have that tunnel vision, you're only looking at one solution, so you don't know what's out there. Also, common examples of that, say today you're a certain hypervisor shop, find out, well, your solution you're bringing in, will that work with my hypervisor? Those kind of things. My application virtualization solution I already have today. Think about those kind of things and how they brought into your environment.
So vendor support. You want to make sure the solutions that you choose for the bake-off have a local subject matter expertise. It's not someone that they're flying in to work with you. You want to have someone available, readily available, and scheduled to work with you while you're doing that bake-off, especially if you don't have the in-house expertise that Jarian was just talking about, right? And you want to be able to set a schedule and times and days that these bake-offs are going to be conducted. You don't want to be left in the dark when you sit there and have the vendor set things up and then they just take off. You want to have someone that you can ask questions to. You want to have someone you can lean on, whether it's a value-added reseller or it's the actual vendor themselves. You got to have someone available.
And also, Shane's going to talk about gap in the feature parity of products as well.
Yeah. So, as you can see, that with all these acquisitions going on, the gap in feature parity is rapidly closing. And it's happening because of the software acquisitions, and it's happening because of the advances in software releases. These big dog vendors are neck and neck, right? So it's important that you understand, the main thing about this slide here that you understand is that don't believe the acquisition hype, You want to understand how these acquisitions are going to integrate into their current products. There's been companies that have made acquisitions that it takes 2 to 3 years to actually integrate into what the solution is going to be. So you want to understand what that product roadmap is going to look like. How is that going to match to what you're doing in your business? How does it pertain to your organization? And like I said before, don't believe the hype.
And also understand once these solutions are bought in, these acquisitions are made, how those products work at scale, right? You want to see some use cases of those acquisitions being done at scale in real world environments. Real quick, we're going to talk about bake-off budget. Especially if you have to bring in outside expertise in to help you with the bake-off, you kind of want to keep cost in mind of that. Maybe you need outside consulting time from the vendor or for a value-added reseller. So as you're thinking about doing these bake-offs, if you don't have the expertise in-house, kind of think about, that kind of budget you're going to need to perform the bake-off.
So infrastructure hardware. In order to be successful in a desktop virtualization bake-off, you need to have adequate hardware. You don't want to have that craptastic hardware because you're going to get craptastic results. So don't use that hardware that you have in your closet from your server virtualization project when you consolidated 4 years ago. Don't do that. Use dedicated hardware. If you don't have the hardware in-house, lean on your vendor, lean on your software VAR, right? Ask them. They want to sell you a solution, and with that solution comes drag-along hardware, right? So they want to get in there and sell it to you. So tell them, you're trying to do a bake-off, give me some hardware to work on, and they will do that. Same thing from a storage standpoint. If you're working with this solution, desktop virtualization requires storage, right? You want to have something to test with. They'll give you a test bed to work with, and it's important to have dedicated hardware, because if you don't have dedicated hardware and you're doing some kind of load testing or things like that, depending on what you're testing, you could affect a production environment. So it's good to have kind of a dedicated test bed to work with of hardware.
And a good example is that I'm working with the customer right now to where they're looking at buying a bunch of HP blades for their solution. So HP's giving them, 4 top-of-the-line blades to test with, kind of the specs they're looking at using for the product. So again, lean on your vendors, see if you can get that hardware in. They're out there. They want to make a sale to you, so they'll let you loan that hardware so you can test it out so they can make you a sale. Also talk about printing and scanning devices. This is a big one I see out there in a lot of projects. Printing and scanning is often overlooked. Think about printers in your environment. Think about if you have any kind of specialized printers out there. Maybe you're doing a point of sale type solution. Maybe you're doing receipt printers, etc. Make sure these solutions work in that environment. Test them during your bake-off. Also scanning. Maybe you have like a document imaging system that you're scanning documents into, and maybe that's the candidate for your bake-off. Make sure that software and that product work, because you don't want to get further down the line and find out, I forgot something, I missed something, and then now I'm going back and trying to fix things and costing more time and more money.
So endpoint hardware, you obviously want to understand the endpoint hardware, because those endpoints are what's going to be used to actually attach and connect into your desktop virtualization environment. When you talk about, we kind of talk through the different models real quick. When you talk about thin clients, you want to test a couple different vendors. You want to test a couple different software OSs of those thin clients. Make sure you pick the one that fits the best for your business needs. You want to leverage demo thin clients. The same thing we were talking about leaning on your vendor or VAR. They will get you demo thin clients shipped to you pretty quickly. So make sure you do that. You don't have to go buy a thin client in order to test on it. When you're looking at the different thin clients, there's Windows thin clients, Zero clients, Linux clients, and there's PC over IP, actual vendor-specific thin clients. Same thing with Citrix and System on a Chip. So there's other things you can test with. Think about repurposed PCs. Maybe you don't want to maybe you want to leverage your existing hardware investment. Look to use programs like Thin Kiosk. It's a great program, that can actually turn your computer into a thin client. It's basically like a Windows shell replacement utility. And test different hardware OSs. If you have, we mentioned that before. If you're a Mac and Windows shop, you want to be able to test those different OSs. And same thing for mobile devices. Test different iOS devices. Test different Android devices. You want to test on those different platforms, because we were talking about before about bring your own device. These people are going to bring those things into your enterprise. You want to make sure that your solution works on it.
Also think about peripheral devices, right? So understand what different types of peripheral devices you have out there. Maybe you're in an environment where you have signature pads. Make sure those work in the solution. Test those. Maybe you have a software solution that needs a USB key or a serial key for it to work on your network. Make sure that works in the solution. Go out there and look at different USB devices, headsets, etc. Make sure you test these, again, because you don't want to get down the road and forget these and then come back and have to rework something or spend more money or spend more time doing something you missed.
So real quick here, these desktop virtualization solutions have security integration points, whether it's Citrix's Secure Gateway or VMware's View Security Center server. And the most important thing about this slide here is understand the security integration points in your environment. You want to bring your security guy in on this, because they do have integration points. And you also want to understand, are you going to leverage existing security equipment that you have, whether it's a Cisco or F5, Citrix, Netscale, or Juniper, or Microsoft. You want to understand how those integration points are, and definitely bring that security guy in.
Also, speaking of security, think about other security things in your environment. Think about multi-factor authentication. If you have multi-factor authentication in your environment today, or you're looking at it, make sure you test that with the solution. Also, look at things like any kind of network access control, proxies or firewalls. Maybe you have some kind of specialized solutions for those. Make sure those work as well. Then when you get into that, also think about forensics. Forensics is huge. I had a huge project stall because of forensics. They couldn't get the right tools to actually get what they want in forensics, so it kind of stalled the project. Also think about antivirus. That's huge as well, because if you don't tweak antivirus right, if you don't look at the vendor papers for antivirus or look at the actual solutions recommendations for it, that can cause huge performance impact in your environment. So you want to look at that as well, and ask the antivirus vendor, hey, do you guys have like a certain antivirus solution that is fit for this environment also as well? So you got to think about these things. Make sure you test these.
Sure, and another thing to think about is software vendor trial licenses. I mean, normally you're looking at like a 30 to 90-day trial license. In some cases, that's not going to be enough for your organization. So you want to make sure that you set that expectation up front that you're going to be testing multiple use cases, and you need more time, because if you don't set that expectation up front, you could be, 60 or you could be 90, 100 days in on the evaluation, and what's going to happen is your users, you're testing, everyone, you set a great precedence of what this solution is going to look like, and then your key expires, and now they don't have access into the environment, and you don't have an extra key to work with. So set the expectation on front. That's the main point about this is if you need more time, set it up front.
So let's talk about end users, right? Make sure, and this is one of the very important things of doing the bake-off, understand your end users. Understand their workflows. You guys as IT people and end users have different thought process, different ways they do things. So make sure you understand your end users, make sure you understand their workflows. Spend some time with them. Sit down, go through the applications with them, etc. The main thing is you want to test these things before you roll them out so you can get any issues up front. So if you understand their workflow, you can test on the back end, capture any small issues before rolling out to your bake-off users to test. That way they have a better experience testing the products.
So you want to understand your environmental characteristics. You want to understand what your environment looks like today from both a user experience perspective and a performance perspective, so you can have something to benchmark against when you're looking at testing in this desktop virtualization environment. From a user experience perspective, it better be equal or better than the current user experience, or your project's going to fail, period. That's it. The end user needs to be satisfied. It needs to be equal or better. I can't stress that enough. And from an environment management perspective, you need to think about what your existing environment management looks like and what it's going to look like in this future desktop virtualization environment. Things like personalization, group policies, and as far as the data aspect here, you want to make sure you test. We're going to talk more about this later, but you want to test with real live data. Test with their data. Don't just have them open up an application and do a couple things in the application, because that's not the real live workflow. Don't test with sample data. You want to test with what they work with every day.
So let's talk about picking your users for your bake-off candidates to test with, right? So when you look at your users, pick a wide range of users in a wide range of use cases, right? You want to find some, low-hanging fruit to get in there to get some easy wins, but you also want to find some challenging users as well. You want to satisfy them. Also think about different types of user devices they're using. Maybe you're retail, you're doing point of sale. See if that works with your solution. Also think about remote locations. Offshore developers is becoming more and more common. Make sure you test them out. Make sure they're having a good experience when they're coming across the pond to get into your solution to do some development for your company. Also, we all know this happens in environments. We have those negative users out there, right? The ones you can never satisfy and they're never happy. Stay away from them, because what they'll start doing is, no matter if it's good or not, they'll go complain to other end users out there, and basically that's going to spread like a virus, like a wildfire, and you're going to kind of start losing your test bed case. So think about that as well. Also think about when you're going through your environment, you want good constructive feedback, right? Whether it's good or bad, it's going to help you with that solution in that bake-off. If you have problems, make sure you fix those problems. If you can't fix them, document them for the post-bake-off results report. But the biggest thing here also is stay away from problem users, but do not stay away from problem use cases, right? Problem use cases, if you can solve those can make or break your project.
So now we're going to get into the bake-off objectives and kind of outlining the actual bake-off. This is important here. This is why we're kind of putting things together. So the first thing you want to have in this is define success criteria. Same thing with any project, and specifically when you're doing desktop virtualization or POCs or pilots, it's the same thing. This bake-off is kind of like a proof of concept, right? So you want to make sure that you set that success criteria. It is imperative that you set that. And the number one thing when setting the success criteria, say that 10 times fast, and setting success criteria is that you ask yourself and your IT team, what is it important that you guys need to see in order for this solution to be a success in your environment? You need to ask yourselves that, because that's how you're going to determine your success criteria. And you want to make sure that you stay on target when you're actually doing this desktop virtualization bake-off, because what's going to happen is you're going to have scope creep, right? If you don't stay on target, you're not going to be able to concentrate on that success criteria. You want to make sure you accomplish that first, and then once you accomplish that, then go ahead and you can look at some of these other features and functions of the product.
So then we talked about bake-off solutions, what features and functionalities are required. So as we talked in the previous slides about picking your user to test with, make sure you use those use cases to map to features and functionalities you need to see during the bake-off, right? Maybe you have an OpenGL application. Maybe you want to bring data back in-house. Maybe you have a single instance image that you want to use. Maybe you want to reuse physical PCs. It's not about everything being centralized in your data center. Maybe you want to take those acquisitions like Winova or Virtual Computer, use your existing hardware, and use that in your environment. Also, maybe you want to take your existing PCs and do like a remote PC type functionality on them instead of bringing that into a virtual machine in your data center. So as you're thinking about that, think about these kind of features out there.
So this is a really important topic, and I'm sure you guys have seen this when you're working in different environments, maybe even in your environment, right? It's team involvement. You guys need to work together in order to make this project successful, and you need to have synergy. And we're not talking about the conference, we're talking about synergy between your team. We're talking about your desktop team, your server team, your application team, your desktop deployment team, security, applications, help desk tiers. They all need to work in conjunction with each other, or this project will fail. Not only will the bake-off project fail, but the post-deployment will fail. You guys need to work together. You ever hear the saying, it takes a village to raise a child? Well, it takes it takes a IT staff working together in order to get a desktop virtualization project to be successful. That's a true statement. It's very important to get everyone involved and on board in your project.
So let's talk about your applications for bake-off, right? Make sure you have those listed out. Make sure you know where the applications are. Make sure you have the application installation media. Do you have an application subject matter expert on site? Is it documented, right? How many times have you guys gone into a project where they don't know where the application software is, they don't know how to install it, and you're sitting there spinning your heels trying to reverse engineer their software, right? So, know where the applications are, know how to install them, and that way you save yourself a lot of time from getting sidetracked on the project.
So bake-off candidate installations, as Jarian was kind of alluding to, you need to determine who's going to install and configure the bake-off candidates, these solutions. These solutions have a lot of features and functions. You got to make sure you either A, have in-house expertise. These are the questions you need to be asking yourself. If you don't have the in-house expertise, are you going to have time to learn these bake-off solutions? As I mentioned, a lot of features and functions in these solutions. Or do you have to lean on a VAR for the bake-off? Do you have to lean on a software vendor or a value-added reseller? And if you do, you want to make sure you follow something like this framework where you can actually have something that you can go step by step with the vendor to make sure things stay on track.
So another thing too, also, if you're bringing a software vendor or VAR in-house to help you with the bake-off, find out what level of engagement you guys need to work with them. You want to dedicate time. You don't want to sit there and have them come in, give them information to get into your environment, and they disappear for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden at the end they come back and say, okay, show me everything. That's not going to work, right? You want them working side by side with you. A lot of things I do on my deployments is I do one of two things. I have the customer shadow me, and I explain everything as I go through it, or I make them do all the work, and I explain things step by step as they go through it, because education is key, because once you leave, you want to make sure that they can keep working in the environment if a small issue comes up. Also, be available too as well. You don't want to have any issues to where if you're doing some bake-off schedule test or scheduling testing for bake-off and they're having issues, make sure you schedule that time up front. That way you're not playing phone tag or email tag or actually trying to get contact with them between their different projects.
So you want to have ownership when you conduct this bake-off. Just like any project, if you don't have someone that owns the project's going to fail. So same thing with the bake-off initiative here. You want to have someone that's going to own the project, and you want to assign roles and responsibilities with this particular bake-off. For instance, you want to determine those prerequisites. So from a customer standpoint, if you have a software vendor or a VAR that you're working with, you want to assign those different prerequisites and get those in line for that software vendor or VAR. Same thing if you guys are the VAR or the software vendor, you want to make sure that you go in and make sure that customer has everything outlined that they need to have set up while you come on site, because otherwise you're going to be wasting time. And just like a project, you need to have timelines and you need to have milestones that are set in this particular project. This isn't just a proof of concept that you can just kind of test with and have fun with. This is a serious project because you're determining what's going to run your business moving forward. And you want to have status updates and bake-off tracking results. We're going to get into the bake-off tracking results in a little bit in a debrief meeting, but that's extremely important because that's where you kind of sift through the results of the bake-off and determine what solution fits your business needs.
And let's talk about setting expectations, right, for the bake-off. Just remember, you're bringing solutions in to test to see if they're working in your environment. So not everything's going to be perfect. You got to understand that there will be some issues that happen. They'll come up. Just make sure that that you either fix those issues very quickly and document what the resolution was for possible pilot, or what you do if you can't fix it, document it, and then follow up with a software vendor / VAR to see what can we do to fix this. And just remember, this is a POC, this is a bake-off, this is not production. So you're there to do everything to meet the success criteria. Anything above that they ask you to do is just bonus.
So management expectations, that's very important to set as well. You need to look at the bake-off candidates. Will they meet the success criteria? We talked about defining the success criteria before. You want to make sure that they can meet the success criteria that you defined. Also, set the expectations with your management that when you're conducting this bake-off, it might not be the sole solution. There might be a third-party add-on piece that might be needed based upon how your business needs are, right? You also want to look at, is a bake-off solution that you're looking at, the potential desktop virtualization solution, how is it going to gel with your existing desktop management solution? Does it gel? And not only that, if you don't have desktop management, how is it going to work with your planned desktop management product that you're looking at in the future? These solutions need to work together, and it's also important to set this expectation with your management, is that desktop virtualization isn't your sole desktop management solution. It works in conjunction with it.
Also, think about your user expectations, right? They want to have the same or better experience than they have on their existing endpoint. If it's not, it's going to fail. Think about the different devices they use to do their job. You know, if they have different peripheral devices out there, those need to be working. That way they can do their job function. You know, some companies have performance-based jobs to where they have to make a certain amount of calls per day, et cetera, et cetera. If they can't do that, they get dinged by their employer. So you got to think about those type of things. Also, think about the user's data, right? Because you don't want test data. You want actually live user data. You either want to bring it in or have it accessible. That way they can do their complete workflow in these solutions, not just do a quick test and move on.
And you want to be open-minded about these solutions. Just because you have a specific investment in a specific vendor or solution doesn't mean you can't look at some of these other solutions. You know, and it's important to keep in mind here that these solutions, you know, it's not about what solution A can do against solution B. It's also about, and not, you know, the feature parity there, it's about the key factors come into play like usability, manageability, the ongoing vendor support and maintenance that's in each of these solutions. You got to think about those things. It's not just about the individual feature sets. You know, it's the overall, you're going to be managing and maintaining this project going forward. You got to understand that. And there's a partner ecosystem that's out there, and that's designed to kind of fill the gaps that are out there. So it's important to know that as well.
Also, as you're doing these bake-offs, you know, you want to have a rating system because you want to know how these products scored in your environment. So not only for the user side, but also on the operations and management side, because you as the management side of this, you want to make sure that you can manage this environment without a whole lot of issues or a whole lot of pain. But on the other side, you want to make sure that your users can use the environment very well, have a good user experience. So what you do is you make a rating system, right? One for the users and one for management. And then we're going to go through here and talk about kind of a rating system that you guys can use.
Yeah, so from a user experience testing perspective, we kind of put a couple ratings together and we looked at things like pass. So some of the ratings options would be pass, you know, functional but needs improvement, fail, and additional comments. And when you look at functional but needs improvement and fail, you want to make sure if you check that you're doing user experience tests and you check, you know, functional needs improvement or fail, that you take down notes as to why it failed or why you think it needs additional improvement. Because what's going to happen is when you go 40, 50 test cases down the road, you're going to sit scratching your head in the debrief meeting, oh crap, why did that one fail? So you want to know and have those detailed notes so you can talk about that amongst your IT staff and the software vendors in that debrief meeting. You know, an example of a test case rating, so a print test, it was fails but need improvement. Why? Because it was able to print, but it didn't have some of that advanced printing functionality like the double-sided stapler, things like that.
Also, on your management side, you want to have a rating system as well. You know, we kind of have one saying like a 1 through 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. So, you know, a couple examples here, you know, say 1, say you're testing a tool out, the manageability, usability is horrible. You're going to give that a 1. You're going to say, get this crap out of here, I want something else. But then on the flip side, if it's a 5, you can say, great, this thing's excellent. You know, I have free time in my hands, I can do other things. I can play solitaire all day instead of fighting fires with a solution. So kind of think about those things as well on the manageability and operational side.
I play solitaire all day anyway. So, so I see some of you guys taking pictures. That's cool. We're actually going to have the slide deck available for you guys online after this, so that should help you guys out as well.
So now we're going to get into the bake-off discussions and test points. And remember, this section is more in examples. Every environment is going to be different. You're going to have your own discussion points and test cases. So this is kind of an example of something that we kind of came up with. So right here, we have the first discussion points and test cases.
Sure. So, and as Jarian mentioned, you need to have discussion points that you're going to have. And what a discussion point is basically a discussion with your internal IT staff as well as a discussion with your IT staff and the software vendor. What are the discussions that we need to have to make sure that this solution is right for our organization? And test cases. These are things that you test from both a user experience perspective and an administrative perspective. If you're testing delegation of administration, actually go into the console and test these things. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about test cases. You know, put these solutions side by side. And you want to follow the rating system we were talking about because that's how you're going to, in the debrief meeting, determine what solutions had the lowest rating and what you need to talk about with your internally as well as with the software vendors.
So let's get into
take notes as well.
So let's get into some test case examples. You know, user environment management. Let's talk about printing. So the solutions you're picking for bake-off, how are they managing printing? Is it in the solution or are you using your existing tools today? How is that going to work? Some test case examples might be you want to assign certain printers out there. Maybe you have thin clients out there that you can't install drivers on. How is that handled in the solution you're baking off? You want to test these things and case them. You know, also look at multi-function printing or any kind of specialized plotters or any kind of specialized printers out there. Make sure those work, make sure you test those and see how those fit into that solution. Is it inside the solution? Is it outside the solution? Do you need a third-party product for printing? Think about those type of things.
Yeah, and things to keep in mind when you're doing these test cases, you always want to keep in mind that what you're testing against with these solutions is how is it working today in my physical environment and what's it going to look like in this virtual environment. Keep that in the back of your mind. And an example here is in another, this is under kind of the user environment management topic, and these are all examples, right? Discussion points that you would have internally are, GPOs in your physical environment. How are those going to map to your virtualized environment that you're looking to put out there? Does this need to be reviewed or changed? If you're doing things like full redirection in your current environment, how's that going to be affected? Where's the data going to be? How are those policies going to be tweaked and locked down in your virtual environment? Think about lockdown policies. If you have strict regulatory compliance, what are your lockdown policies like today, and how are those going to map to how they're going to be in the future environment? And in some cases, those particular policies that you have, whether it's Citrix, VMware policies, Quest, et cetera, they might not be enough to lock down or meet your requirements. So you might have to look at some of these third-party solutions like an AppSense or Group Policy Pack, et cetera. And a test case for this is really just what I was saying before. Understand the granularity of the policies. How granular are these policies? You might have one solution that only has 20, 30, 40 policies, but it's enough for you. That's fine. Does it meet your business requirements? That's what's important. It's not about what vendor A has versus vendor B. This one has more. Oh, it's better. No, does it meet your requirements? You got to keep that in mind.
Think about profile management as well, user personalization. Users think they need to personalize everything, but to their job function, what do they actually need? They don't need to change the background. They don't need the colors. They just need basically application-specific settings, right, to do their job function, their workflow. So as you're going to these environments, make sure that workflow stays the same because you're messing with their domain, so make sure they keep the same workflow. You also got to find out, are you doing any kind of migration too as well? Maybe today you're on XP or Windows 7. Maybe you're going to Windows 8, et cetera. Think about the profiles and how you're going to migrate those into that solution. Can you go from V1 to V2 profiles, from XP to Windows 7 and beyond? Think about those kind of issues. And a test case would be, that exact migration, going from Windows XP up to Windows 7 or 8. Also think about application-specific settings for personalization. Say you don't want to save everything. You only want to save certain things for them to do their job, not everything. So think about, can a solution do that out of the box, or do you need a third-party solution like AppSense or Res, et cetera, to be able to capture that personalization?
So this is kind of in that we got into the operational and administrative aspects. So we kind of talked a little bit about the back end. Now we're looking at operational administrative aspects and discussion points that you need to have from a delegation of administrative perspective. This is really important, is who needs access from both an administrative and a support perspective into the environment? What are the specific features and functions that they require? Discuss the different roles that are available, whether it's application packaging, help desk, tier 1, tier 2, desktop management. What are the roles that you have today in your physical environment? How is that going to map to your virtual environment? And you got to think like in the enterprise, it's least privilege, right? What are the least amount of privileges that they need in order to do their job? You need to understand that. And some test cases for this are to actually create a custom role. You'll be surprised in some of these solutions, you actually can't create custom roles. It's can't. Here, this is your role. That's fine for some organizations, but some of the larger enterprises actually need to have the ability to create custom roles. So a test case for this is go in and create a custom role. It sounds, create a custom role, but you'll be surprised. Like I said, it might not be there. Create the custom role, and then try to assign that custom role to features and functions of the product. Are you able to do that? And like I mentioned before, maybe you don't need to do that, and the other ones are fine, but it's important to at least try to test this.
Also, speaking of operation and administrative, talk about help desk, right? So what help desk tools do you guys have today? Will they fit with the solution you're baking off? Do you need to have tools inside the solution for your help desk solution? So you want to think about those things. Also think about what kind of things you need to do inside the solution. Do you need to shadow users? Do you need to be able to reset sessions? Do you need to be able to send them messages? Do you need to be able to do any kind of performance monitoring on how they're performing if they're calling in saying, my session is acting kind of weird, what's going on? Also, any errors, can you get all that information? Is it in your current help desk solution, or is it built into the product, or do you look at another solution as well? So kind of think about those kind of things.
Right, and on that same note about the help desk, it's what's the user experience like? That's important. What is the experience like for that admin, or that tier 1, tier 2 support, tier 3 to manage that new environment? That's important. Okay, and another thing we're going to talk about here is application delivery and deployment integration. All these different products have different ways to integrate your applications and deployment strategies, right? So you want to understand from internal discussion points to have in your organization, you want to look at what's your current application delivery model, whether it's local, or are you doing application virtualization, are you looking at XenApp or RDS, web-based apps? How does it look in my current environment? You always want to be asking your question like this, and what is it going to look like in the virtualized environment? What are the integration points that are available in each of these solutions? and there's test cases that are available, right, for this. So what you can do is deploy a specific, in some cases, you're not going to have the application groups built, right? So if you don't have an existing XenApp or RDS-based environment, so you want to create a custom role or a custom group that's going to map to a specific business unit, create that and define those applications and assign it to it. And think about access points when coming into these applications. Maybe you want to have, from a security standpoint, you want to prevent certain users getting access to different applications. Maybe if they come in from a remote site, you want to prevent certain things from happening. What are those security lockdown policies? Are they available?
And this is one thing that you kind of can't bake off during your bake off, but you want to kind of know this right here is, what is the actual migration upgrade path later on? Say you pick a solution, it bakes off, you pick it, and then a new version comes out. What's that process look like? What's a minor upgrade versus a major upgrade? Is it in-place upgrade? Is it a forklift? You kind of want to weed those things out, kind of want to understand those. You kind of want to plan for those. Also, you want to think about different the upgrade migration tools. Are they wizard-driven? Are they scripted? Are they manual? Again, you want to make sure that later on when you upgrade these solutions, as new versions come out, new features and functionality, you're not having a very hard time getting to that new platform. You want to look at these things and talk to the vendor about those.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because a lot of folks will actually test these solutions. They're all jazzed up by the solution itself, but they don't think about what's it like after managing the solution post-deployment. So that's something to really keep in mind. So we're kind of getting into the end user experience testing, both WAN and WAN side, and that's actually testing with your end users, okay? And from a automation standpoint, there's some tools that are available. Login VSI is a really great tool. The newest version actually does client-side experience testing, so you can kind of leverage what it's going to look like from a client perspective. Think about Edge Site for load testing. That's a really great tool to actually replay back user workflows. Have the user go through their standard workflow, and you can replay that and generate some load on your boxes. LoadGen, it can assess system responsiveness, and Apposite, a WAN emulator. That's for your remote offices. You want to actually, before you actually go and test with live users at the remote office, test with a WAN emulator. Understand your WAN metrics, test it on a WAN emulator, and then actually tune the policies ahead of time before testing with the end user. Do your work ahead of time. What's the most important thing here is tools are great, automation is great, but at the same time, it's not like testing with your end users. Nothing's better than live end user testing. Users are random, so you want to understand that.
And if you're testing with your users, remember, you want to get a good sample size. You don't want to test with a handful of users and test it. That's not going to give you the best results. You want to test with a good sized portion of your end users to actually get real live results. Because you want to sit there and test with 2 users at a remote site, to come to find out that there's 10 out there, and once you get 3, 4, and 5 on there, everything starts falling down. So make sure you think about those things. As you're thinking about the end user experience, think about bandwidth utilization. So if you have remote sites out there, if you have people working from home, monitor the bandwidth, see what's going on out there. Do you need to upgrade your bandwidth links? Are there any things that you can tweak from the protocol standpoint, where there's any kind of policies or functions out there where the vendor says, okay, you need to tweak these things in these certain situations. You might want to look at that. Also, do you need to upgrade your bandwidth? Think about those types of things. And then as you're looking at that also, do these products support any kind of WAN acceleration optimization as well? Maybe you need that in your environment. So you kind of got to think about these things when you're looking at the bandwidth. Make sure you're always testing this. Make sure you're always looking at this as well and keeping it in mind.
So it's live testing with end users. We talked about some of the automation techniques that are available, but you want to test with your end users. You want to have a realistic size of pool of end users to test with. Okay? And you want to think about actual scenarios and use cases to test with. If you have remote sites, test from those remote sites. Don't simulate to have the user come in internally and test in a local LAN environment. Test in what it actually is like. Have them test from there. Some of them have crappy internet connection. Have them test from home if they're at-home work users. And a really important point here is make sure when you're testing that if it's internally, remove their endpoint. Because if you don't remove their endpoint, what's going to happen, as soon as that first issue comes up, large or small, they're going to just put it aside. It's going to collect dust, and they continue working on their existing environment. So you want to make sure that you remove that. Okay, and also what's important here is these solutions need to be tested, full time. And that's why you would remove the endpoint. But what's really important here is be responsive. Be responsive when these issues come up in your environment. Because if you're not responsive, 2 things are going to happen. One, you're setting a horrible precedent for what your new solution is going to look like, your desktop virtualization solution. And the second thing, these users are testing in a live environment. You need to be responsiveness because at the end of the day, they need to be productive. So don't just leave them hanging, right? And document your issues and the resolutions to these issues. As part of that bake-off debrief that we're going to have, you'll be able to talk about these things. So it's very important to do documentation when you're testing these things.
And this documentation you take will be valuable for the post-bake-off debriefing for your report that you're going to compile to actually make your decision on what solution you're going to pick. And then let's talk about endpoints next. What are you going to do with your endpoints when you're looking at these solutions? Are you going to use the existing endpoints out there? Say you have PCs that aren't too old that you can actually repurpose. Are you going to use some kind of solution to transform those, lock those down? And then what's your replacement strategy? As those PCs start breaking down, are you going to start replacing them with thin clients, or are you going to start with thin clients right away? As you're looking at these different types of solutions, think though, as you're looking at thin clients, make sure those fit into your desktop strategy. Whether it's a plugin, whether it's it can integrate. You want to make sure that on your desktop management strategy that you're not adding something else that's going to add you more heartache, more work, and make you more busier.
So there's different types of endpoints out there. We kind of touched on it a little bit before, but we're going to touch on it again. There's that fat traditional endpoint. You want to leverage your existing endpoints before, you don't have to forklift your entire environment to go over this desktop virtualization environment. You want to evaluate what your endpoint is, your fat client. Does it have the significant performance statistics or resources to be turned into a thin client? And if it does, you can lock it down, streamline it with group policies, and some of these tools, like I mentioned before, Thin Kiosk is a really great tool, replaces the Windows shell and brings you right into your desktop virtualization environment. There's also, and essentially the Thin Kiosk is kind of putting your fat PC on a diet, right? And think about a thin client basically just contains a small firmware OS, and it's basically an embedded OS. And then we kind of thought of ultra thin. It's not really zero yet, but ultra thin is a very thin OS that has firmware and kind of those built-in plugins that bring you right into your desktop virtualization environment. And then there's the zero, the no CPU, RAM, or OS. That's kind of no moving parts. That's like that Panalogic device. And mobile, that's like your laptops, your different mobile devices, Androids, tablets, etc. You want to make sure you test with those, as we mentioned before, with those different OSs as well.
Also, as you're looking at these different endpoints, think about what kind of configurations and options you have in these solutions. Do they have any offloading to the client side? And if they do have some kind of offloading, what operating systems support that? Maybe you have to look at a Windows PC, or maybe you have to look at a Mac or something like that. Make sure you test it out and find that out. Not only find out if it works, make sure it's supported as well. So when you're looking at those type of things, look at also the peripheral devices they're using with those endpoints. Make sure that any kind of USB things that you have out there will work with these thin clients or other type of devices you're using, because you don't want to, again, get down the road and find out you have some specialized USB device that doesn't work with a thin client, right? So make sure you test these things out. Make sure you look at these things. Also, as you're looking at these thin clients as well, think about the management of them. Do they integrate with your existing management? Do they have a plug-in? Do they have something coming down the road to where you're managing things from a single console instead of multiple consoles?
So from a management perspective, and when you're evaluating these endpoints, you want to keep in mind that just because it's thin or a zero client, it doesn't mean it doesn't require management. It still requires management, right? And you want to evaluate, and knowing that, you want to evaluate the management platforms that are available for it. If there is a management platform available, or at the same time, is there plugins for your current desktop management, your physical desktop management product? Some of these technologies are starting to integrate that. Is that functionality available? And if it is, you want to make sure you test with it. And if it isn't available, download that Wise or HP Device Manager and actually test with those solutions, because that's how you're going to be managing these things going forward. And just a note here, and I think you'll start to see it more, is these desktop management products, these Altirises, Landesses, etc. They need to start, and some of them do, start having integration points for these mobile devices as well as these thin clients. Landes is working with HP actively to integrate for HP thin clients. What else is out there? What are they doing for this stuff? That's important to test these things.
Maybe a test case and discussion point for evaluating your endpoints is, make sure your peripheral devices work. Working is one thing, support is another. Make sure it's supported, make sure it works. Some examples out there might be banking signature pads out there. You want to test that with your solution. Maybe you want to look at RFID, USB tap-in, tap-out cards in the healthcare industry. Also think about doing sales out there for a point-of-sale type solution. Maybe you're in retail. Maybe you want to try that as a use case as well. And then again, maybe you're in some kind of design firm, you're looking at drawing tablets. The bottom line here is make sure any type of devices you have out there that you're looking at these, you're testing these, and they're performing well with your solution, that they're supported.
So we're kind of getting into the compliance and auditing section. What's important here for this particular section of the bake-off is, how will you hold up? The discussion points to have internally are, does your company have the requirements for compliance and auditing, right? Do you have those requirements? If you do, how are you currently managing that in your environment today? And what's it going to look like in that futuristic environment, in the desktop virtualization environment? How granular are the compliance and audit policies in each of these solutions? That's important. Does it meet your needs? And can you monitor users' access to sensitive materials as far as medical records, financial data, those people that are coming in remote with AutoCAD stuff and design documents? Can you audit the access to those things? A test case to have for that is just to have, and keep note, and just a quick note here is some of these solutions actually aren't enabled by default. You have to go ahead and enable things like configuration logging and auditing and things like that. But you want to, just a test case for that is kind of have an admin log in, make some changes to the environment, and then have someone else ask him, say, hey, what did I do do to the environment? Can you tell what they did to the environment? What changes did they make? That's important, especially for determining down the road as well, not even compliance and auditing, but if someone, everything's working fine, then down the road, something breaks, well, what happened? What caused it? You can actually see these things. Same thing if you're dealing with like forensic tools, if users steal data or move data around, are you able to kind of pick those things up? It's important to test that.
Also, think about ongoing support and maintenance, right? You want to look at what kind of support documentation they have out there on their site. Think about you and your solutions. You're having an issue. You're trying to learn these things. Go out and check these things out. Look at their best practice guides. Look at their consulting guides. Look at their blogs out there. Also, think about the ongoing support of the product. What's going to cost you. You may have a big licensing cost up front, but then what's year 2, 3, 4 going to look like as far as maintaining and supporting the solution? Maybe a test use case is go out there on their site, start looking at their content out there. See how often is it updated? How often are patches getting released to fix problems? And then once you look at those things, judge for yourself on the quality and content of those to see if that support structure is going to fit for you and your environment as well.
So understanding the licensing model, this is extremely important. We can't stress this enough. Licensing is very, very important to understand. Not only licensing from your actual desktop virtualization candidates that you're looking to bake off, you want to understand their licensing model really well, but you also want to understand how their licensing model, how that model affects your current software that you currently have in your environment, whether it's the Adobes or the FileMakers or Office applications, et cetera. What does it look like when those applications move into that desktop virtualization environment? What does it mean from a licensing perspective? Because if you don't look at that ahead of time, you're going to be down the road, you're going to be rolling your solution out, and then an audit's going to come down, and you're going to get screwed. You're dead in the water because now you don't have the budget to purchase the correct licensing that you need. So you want to make sure you understand these things ahead of time. Understand the licensing on all the way through the entire stack. You want to understand.
Okay. So now we're going to start talking about the post bake-off. Now we've gone through, we've kind of identified what we need to do, what needs to happen, what we need to see, and then we've gone through and done some test cases and that kind of stuff, got the results, got the information. So now we're going to talk about the post bake-off. So what you're going to do is have a post bake-off debrief meeting, right? So take all that information, all that feedback. So those ratings we talked about, take that documentation, compile a bake-off report, have a meeting with everybody, and sit down and talk about it. What was good in this solution? What was bad in this solution? What was the good, bad, and ugly? What solution you think is the winner for that? You got to think about these things and discuss these things. So what these reports will help you decide on that solution. Maybe some issues in that report that you find out you couldn't find resolutions to, so maybe you have to talk to a software vendor or VAR to see, hey, is this stuff supported? Is it going to be supported? What do we do wrong, and how can we get past this issue to make this a success and move into pilot mode?
So the other thing you want to ask yourself as you're going through this, you just learned about all the different products, and the question now is, do you have what it takes to move forward? Does your IT organization have the skill set and what it takes to move forward? Desktop virtualization isn't an individual skill set. It's a blend of technologies. It's a stack. There's a lot involved with desktop virtualization. Do you have the in-house expertise? Another thing you want to look at, will there be operational handover for internal IT? And some of the things to think about with that is in-house training, right? Are you going to have the in-house training? Are you going to look to leverage, on your outsourcing or managed services? But also think about transitional roles. Some of those people, things are going to change when you move to this environment. People are going to be think about the guys that are just out there imaging PCs all the time. That changes. They're not doing that anymore. It kind of changes when you're looking at desktop virtualization. So what are they going to do? What's their transitional role? Do they have the skill set to move into a role that's required for the desktop virtualization aspect? And think of that, in some cases, as you're evaluating this solution, you might actually look at more of a SaaS or DaaS-based model. And the important thing here is, do your line of business applications fit this business model? If you're a really dynamic company, a lot of these call centers need to be really dynamic and agile, you want to make sure that you have a solution that fits that need. You don't want to have a rigid solution like that.
Yeah, I think as you're going through these bake-offs, maybe you said, I don't want to bring this in-house. I want to take this out-house, and my applications support that. I'll go to somebody else, pay them to manage it, and I don't want to take care of it. So that could be something that happens as well in this environment. Also, once you have these reports and they're compiled and you have these questions, maybe there's some limitations or issues you came across, go out and talk to your software vendor or VAR. Say, we came across these issues, what are some things we're doing? Think about the roadmap going forward. What's the future of this product look like? Shane's got a good example on a bake-off that he recently did down in Florida.
Yeah, I was working on a bake-off, and I was looking at View 5 and Zen Desktop 5.5, and one of the main things that the customer cared about was a larger enterprise. They cared about delegation of administration, and unfortunately, in the current shipping version at that time of Zen Desktop, it didn't allow for that advanced delegation that was required. for that customer. So what we did, the customer was a little upset about that, and so we had a roadmap discussion with Citrix and saw that was going to be fixed in a future release. And the customer was satisfied with that because they weren't actually using that piece of the product right away. They were using the XenApp side, which really had granular delegation. So it's important to have those roadmap discussions when you're doing this debrief meeting, because maybe some of those things that come up with a lower rating are going to be fixed in a future release. Where's their head at when they're looking at these roadmaps? It's important.
So now you have all this information compiled, you have the bake-off report, you've either chosen a winner, or you said, you know what, I'm just going to improve my current desktop strategy and just stay where I'm at. So what are the next steps from there? So you pick a winner, right? So what are you going to do next? You're going to go into pilot mode. What you're going to do is you're going to expand to more users in your environment. You're going to do more user acceptance testing. You're going to do more application testing and so forth. So think about these things as you're doing that. You're going to baseline your environment, right? So you want to know what the actual performance of the environment is when it's running optimal. That way you can set up alerts and triggers and that kind of thing to when there's issues with the performance of the environment, so you can get alerts on that. Also think about licensing. Determine the solution's cost. Don't forget about the Microsoft tax, right? Because as you're looking at these solutions, start thinking about these things. What's going to cost me down the road for licensing? Because everyone, no matter what solution you pick, you're going to pay Microsoft. Microsoft's going to come knocking on your door and say, I want my money. So make sure you think about that. Also, we talked about the partner ecosystem earlier, right? So maybe there were pieces of the solutions that, they were a good fit but not a great fit for your environment. They're missing some features that the product doesn't offer. Do you need to look at additional products in that partner ecosystem? So think about those things as well. Also, as you're looking at these solutions, think about hardware sizing and cost. So what you want to do is, one thing you don't want to guess on is hardware sizing, right? Because an undersized environment will perform very badly, and your users will scream if they can't do their job. So think about the hardware sizing of that kind of thing. Get some sample costs of that. Run assessment tools out there. You don't want to guess at this. Run those assessment tools against your user base for a period of time so you can see what kind of resources they're actually using. Do not guess at this. It's very important. We can't stress this enough. And then you want to think about, okay, what about business continuity and disaster recovery? Do these solutions work in that environment? What do we need to do to be able to say, okay, if we lose site A, what do we need at site B for our company to continue working? Again, if we have some kind of pandemic or flu or some kind of weather, what can we do? How will this work? You got to think about these things as well when you start going to pilot, and make sure you test these events as well. So once you pick a solution and go into it, make sure you test disaster recovery and business continuity. All right, so in wrap up here, let's do some advice from the field that we kind of come up with talking between me and Shane. So one thing is very important, and our friend Mark here in front can agree. You only get one shot at this, especially with your end users. So once they get that bad taste in their mouth, they're not going to want to test another solution. They're going to say, no, I don't want to do it. They're not going to be cooperative. So you want to get one shot at this. Also, on your C-level side too, they don't want to go through this process again if it failed. They don't want to maybe spend additional money, additional time, and resources doing that. So think about that kind of thing. Also, when you're going through this, take your time, right? Because when you rush through things, you miss things. When you miss things, issues happen. And when issues happen, you have to go and turn around, go back and redo things. So remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to crawl, walk, run. You guys understand that, right? Do not go ahead and just go speeding through this and think, okay, everything's going to be okay, because that's what's going to come back to haunt you later down the road. Also, do your research on the solutions. Engage the community. Talk to the guys here next to you, your peers at this conference. Talk about their experience. Try to learn from them as well. Because at the end of the day, it's a big community that you can lean on others to get information on. Because everyone's got different experiences, different use cases, and they have different problems that they're trying to solve. So think about that. Also, make sure, as you're going through this process, make sure you document everything, communicate everything. Be engaged. And what I mean by that is, sometimes you think no communication is a good thing, but no communication can be a bad thing. You want to be on the front side of problems. You want to be on the front side of things. You don't want someone calling you up screaming when there's a huge fire and everyone's unhappy and you have to scramble your resources to fix the issue. So think about that as you're doing this, and some things you can think about. Also, never guess, assume anything. You want to know and question everything. So when it comes to your users, you want to understand their workflow to a T. You don't want to guess how they're going to do something. You want to know how they're going to do something. Also, when it comes to sizing your environment for hardware, you want to know. You don't want to guess. Because again, if you undersize, it's going to come back to haunt you later on. So the more you know, the better off you'll be. So don't hesitate to educate yourself every day. If you're not learning something, go out there and learn something. Make sure you know the solutions, how they work, ins and outs, and that kind of stuff. Go to training. Talk to guys here at the conference. Read blogs out there. Read support documentation. Make sure that you educate yourself, because the more you know, the better off you'll be.
Yep, so one thing we wanted to talk to you guys about real quick is something that we're looking to put together. It's techbakeoff.com, and this little logo we had put together as well. And basically what techbakeoff.com would be, and determining if we're going to move forward with this project is really based upon your feedback. So we kind of have a survey up on the website if you can just jump in there and put your feedback. But what we want to do with this is kind of cook through that vendor FUD. We want to provide a vendor agnostic framework, an actual cookbook that you can download and compile and use to walk through your entire bake-off. And here's the thing, is it's variables, right? There's a couple features and functions we want to provide. Things like test cases and discussion points, right? What we want to do is provide the ability for you guys to actually submit your test cases and discussion points as you conduct the bake-off, and then we can compile that. So next person that goes and conducts their bake-off, if they're in education, they can go and click these specific use cases, BYOD, et cetera, and they can download the cookbook with the pre-compiled test cases to do. That's what we're looking to do here. And same thing from a feedback perspective. If the person opts in, not unrelated to any of the environment-specific information, just feedback, you can submit that feedback. And now when the next person goes to look at the actual bake-off, they can evaluate the different products completely vendor agnostic. Not cutting through all the cooking through the FUD. You're seeing at the end of the day how these things rated in what particular use cases and. In business needs and industries that this happen in. So like I said, this is something that we're looking to put together, and it really depends on the feedback that we get from you guys. We'd like to provide you guys with a cookbook that would also have industry experts feedback as well in this cookbook on conducting these bake-offs and provide you with that framework. So again, it's techbakeoff.com. There's really nothing there except a little summary and a survey. So based upon that feedback will be if we kind of move forward with the project. So thank you.
Good, guys? All right, well, we're got through a lot of the presentation. We actually made it under time.
We must have been talking quick.
Must have talking fast.
Hope you guys understood all that.
So any questions for us?
Go ahead.
Do we have a microphone or we're just going to
Oh, yeah. Let me walk one back.
I don't think I named loud.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So.
You guys can hear me okay? I think obviously this was great. I really appreciate the summarization of points. Let's talk about finances just for a second, because I think many of us in this room have probably gone through this exercise, maybe not as detailed, but when we get to the executive level and we're actually doing that presentation, one of the first obvious questions that come up repeatedly is, what is this going to cost, and is it actually cheaper than what we're doing today? So what have you guys learned, or what would you be willing to share on the concept of total cost?
Okay, well, I'm going to steal a line from my friend Dan here in the front. There's no ROI in doing this, but there's value, right? So what the value is having that flexible workforce, having that agility, being able to expand your workforce to work from anywhere, bring in different devices. Maybe you say, you know what, I don't want to own any more IT assets anymore. I'm going to give my employees a stipend plan. They can bring their own device and say, you know what, you can bring whatever you buy your own support for it. I'm not going to support it. So if it breaks down, you don't call me, you call the person you bought it from. So there's those type of things out there. But again, if you're going to go with that model of bringing your own device, you want to make sure they can get to their applications and do their jobs, but also make sure they do it securely. So there's different things you got to think about when looking at this. It's not just about cost, it's about what value it provides to your business.
Flexibility.
What flexibility can it bring? What can it help you do to make your business better? Because maybe you want, like I said, a flexible workforce. You don't want the 9-to-5 jobs. You want to say, okay, you can work when you need to as long as you're getting your job done. So it's more than just a cost perspective. You need to look at the big scope of the picture and see what value it brings to your environment. So it's not selling them on the cost of the solution, it's selling them more on the value of the solution. That answer your question?
It does, and I don't want to take all the time, but it does answer the question. The thing is, and this is the reality, in most organizations of scale, if you can't prove some relative cost avoidance or savings, the finance folks that handle much of the investment capital to embark on these endeavors won't pass this along to the next step. So in other words, we can do the agility, we can do the security, we can do the BYOD, we can do the next generation workforce and enticing people and doctors and providers, but finance usually holds the keys to passing this forward. So what I found to be quite a challenge actually is creating a financial tool that not only the executive leadership buys into, but the vendors can come support and drive, meaning it is cost avoidance, it's cost savings, but we have to get the attention of executive leadership to sign off on these endeavors. That's why many of these projects have gotten all the way to pilot and have proven to be a success, but financially we fall short.
And in those cases too, you want to look at other options because, especially when it comes to your hardware and your storage,
Right.
Traditional storage and traditional computing sometimes don't apply here. So you might want to look at some of these emerging technologies that I call performance enhancing storage technologies, where you're looking more to reduce that cost on the back end hardware, and sometimes that can help you with the cost issue as well. Good question. Any other questions?
think there was a question back there. What's the guy left?
All right, well, we're done with our presentation. If you have any questions or think about anything, we'll be here throughout the week. We'll be out here on the expo floor and stuff, so feel free to come up to us and ask questions. Thank you for attending our session.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. Really
Make sure you
appreciate it.
fill out your feedback forms.
Thank you.